Hey everyone, Mario again, coming at you with another movie review. Today I'm reviewing a film that I haven't seen in more or less 10 years. It's a film that, first couple years it came out, I always enjoyed. I even got around to reading the original source material, which I did enjoy. The ending is different, which I will discuss later in this video. I'll definitely say it's one of the better Stephen King adaptations. It, of course, is 2004's Secret Window, starring Johnny Depp and directed by David Koepp. Yes, that's how his name is pronounced from how I've looked it up, even though it's spelled differently. Based off of the Stephen King shorts, based off of the Stephen King novella Secret Window, Secret Garden. Now the film was made for 40 million and it made about 92 million, so it would be a moderate success, though if you go by Hollywood accounting, it barely made money because, Hollywood accounting has to make at least double its budget to break even. I know, really weird. So made a little bit of a profit by that. Then of course, if you were to factor in marketing and all that, they probably would consider it a flop, but Hollywood marketing sure is weird. If you were to go by today's dollars, it was made for 51 million and it made about 120 million. So like I said, still a moderate success until you get into the kabuki-ish accounting. Now Koepp also wrote the screenplay, and if that name does sound familiar to those of you who don't get on IMDb regularly, Koepp is the screenwriter who wrote Jurassic Park, co-wrote it actually, because Michael Crichton was technically credited for a previous draft, and he also wrote the sequel, The Lost World, by himself, which is why one scene in the film ends up using unused B-roll from The Lost World. Now this is probably the highlight of his directing career, because the only other film that's, people would know the name of, sadly, is Mordecai, so it's like, well, he still worked for Depp, but his career went down and it came to a director. Hopefully it goes back up, because watching this film, it's like, wow, he should have gotten some more high-profile films. Shame he didn't, at least ones that I recognize. Then again, he also has Carlito's Way as a writing project under his belt, and he was also the second unit director on The Lost World, so it's like a roller coaster. His career has highs, it has lows. We'll be able to say how it was as a whole once he passes to the clearing at the end of the way. The cinematography was handled by Fred Murphy, which that name didn't sound familiar off the top of my head, but there was something a little familiar about the cinematography, just a little bit. Not as much as past times I've said that, but looking at his list, I can see why. He's done a couple other films I did love. Freddy vs. Jason, that's more like enjoy than love. And October Sky, a film that I do want to review on this channel one of these days. He also did a film that's on the watch list, Eddie and the Cruisers. Theatrical film was Drill Bit Taylor. So you can see why he hasn't done any cinematography and feature films in a while. He's been mostly doing TV, like episodes of The Good Wife, which is a shame. He should be doing more, but alas, Hollywood is a cruel mistress at times. Now, the film received mixed reviews from critics when it came out, and watching the film, I can sort of see why, but at the same time, it's like, there should have been a few more positive ones, but you know how critics are at times. They just want to complain about everything or just nitpick to death certain things. Or, here's a favorite, compliment while giving a mild insult at the same time. Now, one of the few who actually did give a good review is Roger Ebert. Now, if you've paid attention to my videos, you know that I don't hold Siskel and Ebert in as high regard as other film reviewers do, mainly because most of the time I end up disagreeing with them, like their stances on slasher movies. Now, the cheaper ones I can understand, but the ones that have the budget behind them and they lambasted, I just shook my head. He gave Secret Window 3 out of 4 stars, which is a pretty good review, and this was the highlight of what he had to say about the film. Secret Window could add up to a straight-faced thriller about things that go boom in the night, but Johnny Depp and director David Koepp have too much style to let that happen. Now, that's a little bit of an example of what I mean by giving a compliment but also paying a mild insult, but in this case I agree with that, because if we did not have a competent director like Koepp and an actor who knows what he's doing like Depp, the film, while still technically good, wouldn't have been as good. It's one of those instances where you look at the story and say, in the hands of a genius or someone who's competent and with the right actor in the lead role, this could be a great film, but since it had neither, it fell short of its potential. It had both pieces, so it fulfilled its potential. Now, I haven't seen all of Depp's work, so I can't say if this is his best acting performance, but I can definitely say this is one of my favorite ones he did. I mean, he did this one around the same time he did the first Pirates of the Caribbean film, which was, I believe, his first Academy Award nomination. And then he followed this one up with Finding Neverland, which, if I remember right, gathered his second one. Garnered, I should say. Garnered his second one. And then his third one was for Sweeney Todd, and sadly he hasn't gotten any more since then. But whether or not he deserves any more after the last couple films he's made is going to be up to the individual. But Depp is one of those actors I really want to go through his filmography and do a little marathon of, but that's something I'm going to get to down the road one of these days. Like I said, this is definitely one of my favorite performances from him because you just like the character, but there just seems something a bit off about him, but it's hard to tell what exactly. The main thing is that he always seems to be falling asleep at times, and then wakes up and weird stuff happens, which is part of the foreshadowing to the end of the film. Other actors in the film is we got John Turturro, who decided to appear in the film because one of his sons is a fan of Stephen King, so it's the Donald Pleasance syndrome with Halloween. It's like, John Carpenter, I'm going to appear in your film just because my daughter said your last film was cool. And then this one's like, my son likes Stephen King, so I'll appear in a Stephen King film, and my son will like me better. We got Charles S. Dutton as a private investigator, always good to see him. We got Timothy Hutton as a character named Ted, which is his second Stephen King outing. He previously played the title character in The Dark Half, which I'll get to watching that film one of these days. And it's kind of a little ironic that he's in that film since they do have similar themes. The most obvious one, of course, being that the lead in both is an author, which is one of Stephen King's little tropes. But considering he is an author, you can kind of see why, especially given the plots of each film that involves an author character. Probably the most personal for him, of course, is The Shining, but then Misery is also a little personal, although the movie version does not really betray it as much as the novel does. Then we got Maria Bello as Amy, who is Johnny Depp's wife in the film, but they're going through a divorce. Which I think about this time I should get into the synopsis. Just say all around the acting is pretty good. It's just that Depp is the one that carries the film for the most part. Now, the plot of the film is that Mort Rainey is a successful writer. He's going through divorce, and he's living at their second home, which is out in the country. It's in a wooded area, so get some seclusion. One day, a gentleman named John Shooter knocks on his door and says very calmly, "You stole my story." As you could expect, Mort is like, "What?" And he's like, "No, I didn't steal your story." Shooter is like, "Yes, you did. You got this one." He leaves the story for him. After a little bit of hesitation, Mort goes through and is like, "Wait a minute, this sounds familiar." He gets down one of his short story collections and realizes that Shooter's short story, Sowing Season, and one of his previous short stories, Secret Window, are nearly identical. Now, their prose is different, the characters' names are different, and the ending is different, but the rest of it is the same. Now, most of the time, I don't like revealing the end twists in film, especially if it's an amazing twist or great twist that makes you re-examine the whole film. But in this case, in order to discuss it, I have to. So I'm going to give you about a 5 to 10 second lull, and then I'll start discussing it. Probably in post, I'll put something up that says, "Here there be spoilers," or something like that. But here we go. I'm going to give you a countdown. If you want to skip to the end, where there's no more of that spoiler thing, you can. But if you don't care about spoilers, I've already seen the film, you may progress forward. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Here we go. The twist that we find out at the end is that there is no John Shooter. Mort was the one doing everything. Because apparently all of the mixed feelings that are going around in his head about his wife, the divorce, her cheating on him, the life he's living right now, and of course him being a writer too, caused him to create a character named John Shooter. And part of his mind, it's kind of a psychopath, part of his mind went over to Shooter. So whenever he's having conversations with Shooter, he's essentially talking with himself. Which makes me wonder what the one character that passed him earlier the film must have been thinking if he saw him like talking to himself. I was like, is he thinking of a conversation? Like, oh, he's a writer. He's probably thinking of something for a new story, and he's just saying it out loud to see how it feels out loud. Every time that Shooter did something, whether it be kill the dog, light the house on fire, or do some other things that he does, it was Mort doing it, but he doesn't remember, which explains the brief periods where he goes to sleep and wakes up later and he's like, huh? A little bit too late for a nap.
Means he had to write the short story, everything. And when he finds out, he just goes blank for a few seconds, and just the way it's revealed to him, he's like, ah. And the thing I love about it is that it's his other part of his mind that's him is actually bringing up some of the weird little continuity errors involving his life. And at first he just doesn't want to acknowledge they're there, but then once he finally does, he goes like, rah, 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 which just shows Depp's work as an actor, because that wasn't in the script. That was an idea of his own. He took it from his then son, who was pre-verbal, who would say that, and he felt that Mort, just from this revelation, would be so shocked that he would revert temporarily to a pre-verbal state. Which why he did not get an Academy Award nomination or any other type of award of high note for this film shocks me, just from this scene alone. And the other thing, because most of the time when people think of Depp nowadays, they think of, some of the questionable film choices he's made, and of course constantly doing Jack Sparrow, which by now seems to have turned into a caricature of its original self. But when you watch films like this, you really see how good an actor he can be when he has the right script and he's not overdoing it. Because the most over the top he probably ever goes is the raw thing, which, considering his emotional break, is to be expected. Now, the thing I love about how they shoot the film when he finds out the truth about what's going on is that it makes me think of The Dark Tower, specifically the second book with the character of Susanna, who at that point was two people, Detta and Odetta. Whenever either is confronted with a little bit of continuity gaps in their stories or things that prove their stories wrong, they just don't want to confront it. And Mort's the same way during that conversation with himself before he finds out the truth. Where he's like, nope, 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 nope. And then when he has the truth, he breaks. And in a similar way to Detta and Odetta becoming one person, Shooter and Mort become one person. But it's essentially Mort with the aggressiveness of Shooter. And he turns into a killer and he kills his wife and Ted and disposes of their bodies. Which, that's the one major difference between the ending of the novella and the movie. He gets away with it in the movie, or at least for the foreseeable future, he's getting away with it. But in the novel, he gets killed. But the weird thing is that at one point, one of the people says, yeah, I thought I saw somebody with him, but they kind of look transparent. So it hints that Mort had created a character so real, he was coming to life. Which fits in a weird way with King's book universe, the whole different dimensions thing. And maybe it was the Crimson King getting off on jollies, if you want to put that in retrospect. But it definitely adds to the creepy vibes of some of King's endings that you're like, whoa. It's one of those things that ending could have worked on film, but it might have gotten laughs from the audience. So going to a more realistic ending, but essentially with the bad guy getting away with it, fits. And it also makes you wonder, how long are the bodies going to be there? Is the ending that he wrote in the new story going to happen and no one will ever find out? Because the sheriff knows he did it, he just doesn't have any evidence. Or will Mort actually get away with it? Because if he's ever arrested, he could probably get off, or at least get a lesser sentence on an insanity plea. But, which is how the film ends, it just keeps the audience wondering. And that's one of the reasons I love the ending. Alright, spoiler time over. Now, if you haven't seen this film, definitely give it a watch. If you don't like the twist, that's fine, but like I said before I got to the spoiler part, I just think that it comes at the right point in the film, makes you think over things you've seen previously in the film, and makes you re-examine the whole film. And then you're like, I don't think it was talked about as much as, say, the twist ending to The Sixth Sense, but I'd say it's an ending in that vibe. I don't know if it's as good as that one or not, because I haven't watched The Sixth Sense in a while, but it's around that level, at least to me. If I were to give it a score, probably a 4 out of 5 stars. Definitely comes with my recommendation, as I've said a couple times already. And if you do want to read the short story, that comes with my recommendation too, but note that the endings are different. I don't remember any of the other differences, but there's minor ones, like he has a cat in the book, whereas he has a dog in the movie. There's like other superficial differences, but that's just the only big one I can think of off the top of my head.